I'm cleaning up this beef that's Don's pizza here. But you wait off on it.
You sit.
La 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 la. I know it looks like it's a phone, huh? Good. I'm not though. Are you playing? You weren't even tripping, huh? Okay.
Any attention is good attention to you.
No, let me sit on it like that.
You don't like any
Great golf. So it's not live.
Better now, though.
Hey.
Feel that.
On Monday, Tuesday.
Oh, I don't lose it. Can I take a picture of these?
Hot water. Yeah. That's got some sugar water right now. And it was
Okay. Number one, Sana.
Hello. Welcome to Firm Believers on a Friday here at the Magic House. I'm very happy that you guys decided to come here today. They made all kinds of choices at where Disney wanted to be, but you decided to hang out with us.
We had no choice.
If I can, I will. That's right. Today we're going to get into a fun subject, so we'll jump right into that. But before that, we'd like to open this up with praise reports. Hear what God's doing in our week. But before we do that, would anybody like to open us up with prayer? Yes, please.
What?
Good.
All right. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for giving us another beautiful day, and we just are blessed to be able to come to the Magic House and listen to Anthony break down your words and give us a better understanding of the message tonight, and for each one of us to take what we need to hear. And we just ask all this in your Son's name.
Amen. Thank you. Like I said, I like to open this up with praise reports because I love to hear what God is doing in our lives as a church. So on an individual basis, what's going on? Anybody have some praise reports? Any cool things God has been doing in the past week or so? Yes.
So my daughter's boyfriend 2 days ago was shot while she was on the phone with him. And she said, yesterday morning, she texted, she said, Mama, I prayed last night. She's not a big prayer. And she said, and I woke up to his phone call saying, pray for me, didn't you? And she said, yeah, I don't pray. He said, well, where? Because he had a tooth down his throat and he hit him right by the heart.
Yeah.
And so he's alive and he's doing it.
Wow. Okay. So instant miracles are happening and stuff when we start to pray. Not surprising, but that's pretty awesome to hear. So that's good. That's great. So we pray and people are living. That's awesome. Anybody else? Praise report throughout the week, maybe 2 weeks? Yes, ma'am.
You got 5 minutes? No, I'm just kidding. So I was able to go back to Oklahoma and rescue and find my daughter. I was living on the streets in Fentanyl.
Yes.
And we found her knotted out by the guy in the building.
Yeah.
So got her, brought her back here, got her ID and her insurance today to get her to detox.
Hello.
So yeah, I got her with me. That's the one I've been worried and crying about.
That's great. I love it. So now mom has a little bit more comfort in her life.
But you know, that was my true test up there. I had to sit, trust, know he was gonna do it.
Yeah.
And it was hard, I sat there, I was able to put everything in play, and
Yeah.
everything went right to her, like the first spot we went to look, there she was.
Oh, story. Sitting here, we're praying, and we go out of our way to go look for somebody that was missing, gone, and then you're able to find it very quickly, right? That's amazing. I love that. It's an awesome story. And now we get to see what that story looks like, just because we still get to see it kind of like unfolding and where it's going to go from there. That's amazing. That's awesome. I love it. So I can't wait to hear more about it as we go along and see where that's landed. Anybody else have some praise reports? Anything great that God is doing in your life in the past week or so? Yes.
I went to an old friend's house, not to hang out and be dad, but to go there because I visit his mother, right?
Yeah.
I go to visit his mom and help his mom out.
Yeah.
So she's praying for her son, he's still lost, right? So when I go there and I see her, well, she speaks Spanish, so our communication's a little bit next to none, right? So anyways, long story short, her son is someone who's really worldly, right? He makes a lot of crazy decisions, right? So I show up and I'm having breakfast with them, and I go out to the backyard, and he just happens to be there.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, this is a trial, right? So I go out there and I say hello. He has been contemplating in his mind on becoming a pastor. So he's probably going to be turning a new leaf, I pray and hope.
Yeah.
But through the example of me coming, because his parents were the ones that dropped me off in Laguna Hills before I came here.
Right.
And so by that action alone, it's like been a domino effect, right? People are being able to see the example of Christ. And it's not just through me, but every posting that you guys put out on Facebook, I repost our Sunday nights out there. So it's being effective everywhere, not just here.
I love it.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's big.
We're starting to see what it is that we do throughout the week and what it is that we stand for. And as we come together as a church, we're starting to notice that God is doing some things, maybe farther than you even understand. A lot of us think that, most of us are only thinking about ourselves and how things are affecting us on an individual basis. But the fact of the matter is that people that we talk to, people that we influence on a one-to-one basis, people are being changed. On top of that, there are people that they're talking to, maybe people that are just watching as we're living our lives are being affected. And on top of that, we do a lot of social media stuff too, and that's just kind of branching out in different directions too. There's a lot of things that are happening inside of our tiny little church here and what it is that we're doing. But that's wonderful. I love to hear that people are making the decisions or trying to go in directions that may be more beneficial for them. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Yes?
So today was the first day that I, instead of arguing with someone,
Yes.
I gave them a Bible scripture, and it turned the whole conversation around.
Wow.
So the more I get into my word, and the more I get these little nuggets, if you will,
Yes.
and I share them, I share them instead of my own understanding, has a bigger effect than God's did.
I love that. We get to that place where we allow God to be God and say, you get out of your own way, right? Because you want to argue. I'd love to argue. But get out of the way and say, how about God, you handle this one. Put your hands in your pockets, I'll fight for you, right? You get to that point where you begin to see the fruits of that, and it ends up becoming, the end result is way better than the result that you probably were going to have, right? And being able to see that in action is exciting. It's like a miracle. It's like a tiny little micro miracle to be able to see something like that happen. So it's really cool to see God moving in things. Is there any more before I jump in? Yes, sir, please.
So like my grandma, a lot of you guys have met her. She's been struggling with like a skin cancer, and she had surgery last week, so it's kind of like 2 weeks ago now. And so on her face, we removed the skin cell that was cancers, and now she's cancer free.
What?
Yeah.
Grandma's cancer free. That's all I know. There's a lot of awesome things that are happening inside of the world of medicine. People are starting to figure out how these bodies work finally, and then getting to a point where we can actually get something done.
Yeah.
Not necessarily living in fear of certain things anymore, but being able to actually lean on people and lean on our medical necessities, if you would, to be able to get things fixed up. So that's really great. That's awesome, dude. Congratulations, man.
Brother Brian was talking about a pig heart was transplanted into a human.
Yeah.
And it actually worked.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, wild.
It's wild. Medicine's wild. All the crazy things that are happening, but it's a blessing to be able to see these types of things go in the right direction. As I say, as often as I can, especially every week after praise reports, God is moving. He's doing all kinds of things, sometimes big, sometimes small, but God is always doing things. It's entirely up to us as to whether we recognize it and open our eyes to it or not. God is always there. It's up to us to be able to notice it You'll be able to open up and say, maybe you stop thinking about yourself for a second and start looking at, noticing all the beautiful blessings that are happening around us. So I guarantee you, if we stayed here for an hour, you think about it a little bit more, you'd find a praise report in your life as well. So keep on thinking on those things and remember that we serve a big God who's moving, who is alive, who is doing a lot of things within all of our lives on an individual basis. All right, let's jump into tonight's topic called You're a Slave. Now, you guys know by now that I love talking about things that get people to think. In fact, I love to offend people. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Usually, offense is the start to like some sort of movement, change in one way or another. Unless we're not on the grounds of movement and change, then it just offense and I'm a jerk and all the other things that follow along with that. But I really do believe that, at least in our group here, we like the harsh truths. I think in our group here, we don't like beating around the bush. The only times that we have done that, recognize that and said, you know what, I haven't really made a lot of progress beating around the bush. I made a lot more progress with people telling me straight up what the problems are. I need to be hit with that harsh reality. And so, on tonight's harsh reality, we're going to be talking about slavery. So, this concept of slavery is usually pretty, our brains kind of go to places really quickly when we hear that word slavery. For example, when you think of the word slavery, we usually think about the most common slavery inside of our country here. Whenever you think about slavery, you think about the African Americans that were, the Africans that were pulled over here and were completely turned into slaves. It's probably one of the most recent ones that happened, and especially the one that's so daunting on us because it's here in America. And you can tell it wasn't really that long ago. It's long enough, but at least a full generation ago or two. So when we look at those types of things, this is usually what we think of. But the fact of the matter is that slavery has been around for a very long time. In fact, Jewish people have been through slavery a couple times. Read your Bible, you've been finding out that they were in slavery quite a few times. And it's not just them either. You've been finding out that people in China have been in slavery themselves in their country. And you end up noticing that slavery is not just specifically taking from a country and putting in yours. They've actually had slavery inside their own country with their own people, more so having to do with class. And then a super common idea of slavery, especially these days, what we understand, at least more these days, is sex trafficking, sexual slavery. So we end up noticing more than anything that slavery is actually pretty common. It's actually a relatively common thing that we understand through history. It's not just one thing. It's not just what it is that's happened in America. It actually happens all over the world. It's actually happened in history for quite a bit. And if you fast forward time to where we are today, they say that this was done in 2018. That we have a lot of slavery still happening in places on the other side of the Atlantic. Modern slaves are victims of workplace abuse, debt bondage, forced marriage, and sex trafficking, among other factors. Just in these alone, you can see that it's in the millions people are still in slavery. So this is not necessarily a gone subject. It's very much still a thing. And so when we understand that slavery is still a thing, it's kind of sad. When you think about that, you're like, I feel like that shouldn't be a thing. But at the same time, it starts getting us to think, as individuals, hopefully, especially as Americans, think about things like, well, that sucks. I don't like the idea of slavery. But we don't think about it all the time. We usually sit in our own place of our own independence. And we start thinking, I'm glad I'm free. I'm glad I'm a free spirit living in the country that I live in, and as free as I am, it's so wonderful and awesome. So I would like to ask you a question. This is the only question of the night that I have for you. Do you think you're independent?
No.
No. Okay. Does anybody have an answer as to why they think no? Yes.
I think we're a slave to our job, we're a slave to...
Very good. I like that answer. Yes.
It's the same thing, like say for our phone, worldly things, material things, people, and like you can't just get up and leave anything. You're tied to your job, you're tied to this, you're tied to that bill, you're tied to this bill.
Very good. It seems like we are slaves to quite a few things by this point. The idea of independence, like to walk around as though we got it all together and nobody gets to tell me what to do. But maybe the fact is a little different. Well, here's the definition of independence. Independence means free from outside control, not depending on another's authority. That's what independence actually means, at least in the dictionary. Free from outside control. Nothing outside of you can control you. Nothing outside of you can control you. Not depending, you don't depend on another's authority. Okay? I want that to sink in a little bit. Not banking, not depending on anybody else's authority, and you're free from outside control. When I sit and think about that a little too long, I begin to get to a place where I figure out that maybe I'm not as independent as I think that I am. Because this idea of free from outside control, I start thinking about my own independence and what it is that I've done with the outside and how it's affected me and how much I depend on other things that I may have given authority to. The fact of the matter is that most of our opinions and actions are influenced by the opinions and actions of others. This is a fact. Funny enough, as we walk around like we're original, like we came up with this. And the fact of the matter is that we did not. We are all mutts of personalities. Every single one of us are walking around and we picked and chose in the buffet of life. I want to be this. I like that. We heard all kinds of things that everybody said and done. And we said, I'll take that and I'll take this and I'll take that. And you slapped it together and you said, this is original. In reality, I could probably find a million other people just like you. And so, the fact that most of our opinions and actions are influenced by the opinions and actions of others means that maybe our independence is not really as much as independence or freedom as we think that it is. Maybe we are controlled by things on the outside of us. I get me to the point to think to myself that actually, God is the only true independent. Right? If that's what that's based off of, if nothing on the outside can ever tell me or influence me to do anything, it doesn't control me in any way, shape, or form, and we come to recognize that actually I'm pretty controlled by a lot of things. I stop at the red light just like everybody else. Things out on the outside of me control me, for sure. I understand that. God is the only one that is truly independent. He doesn't need to do anything that anybody says or does, or tells him to. He's not influenced in that way. He's true, independent. He needs nothing. Given that understanding, that means that the way that it is that we think about ourselves is usually given by everybody else in the world. So in Romans 12:2, like the scripture a lot, it says, do not be conformed to this world. Listening to everything that's going on here, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind.
Amen.
Renewal of your mind. Reboot this mindset. I understand that I stand where I am today and who it is that I am based off of all the information that's came into this head of mine. Now, everything it is that I say is influenced by all kinds of information out there. Now, how dangerous is this world when it comes to information? There's a lot of wacky information out here. A lot of alternate facts, as they would say at times. These types of things happen all the time, but they still get into this head of mine. And so because of that, I have to be able to take a warning like this, or more so a direction like this, where it says, do not be conformed to this world. Conformity is what's happening in my head. I'm starting to conform to the things that are being said to me. Conforming and saying and doing what it is they're asking me to do. But he says, don't do that, but be transformed. Transformed by the renewal of your mind. Another way that this is said, this is quote by Chief. Whoever has your ear has your future. Whoever has your ear has your future. Whatever you're listening to, I would assume also, whatever you're looking at, whatever you're really in tune with, has your future. What are the things that we're shoving into our heads? What are the things that we're thinking about that's making us who we are? Because if I stand here today, who it is that I am now, that means it's based off of all the things that I've listened to in the past. All the voices it is that was speaking into my ear that I've allowed to get to where I am right now. Who are those people? What are those things that have gotten to me that have determined my future, which is now my present? And what am I going to do from this point of who I'm going to listen to as I'm staring into my own future? When we start thinking about this idea of, we'll say, slavery, and what it is that we're a slave to, if you would, we should be thinking about, how is my mind? What am I thinking about all the time? Because what you think about often is what you're a slave to. What you think about often is what you're a slave to. Those are the things that control us, are the ones that we're thinking about all the time. It's all kinds of scenarios where we're sitting here and you're thinking about something. Maybe it's something you cannot control in any way, shape, or form. And you begin to realize that you can do nothing. You can say nothing. You can think nothing else but this thing that is controlling you. Has anybody ever been in a situation like that? Where a situation came up and you can't do anything outside of that. It's the only thing you can think about. You can't go to work today because of this thing that I constantly think about. The stress of that is starting to weigh me down. You think about that concept. These things start to kind of like be put in a place where we're like, man, I might be like, I do what this thing that I'm thinking about is telling me. I'm a slave to this thing that is in my head. Yes, God. Sex trafficking is one of the oldest forms of slavery. Physical forms of slavery. Really old. In fact, it's been floating around for a long time. And when we think about this, we think to ourselves that, now we've been talking about it a lot. It's been in the news all the time. There are foundations all over the place. People are talking about it a lot in the past 10 years, especially, a lot more. But it's been around for a very long time. In fact, it's been around for such a long time that it's been in the Bible. There's a story about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's this terrible city that's just fallen apart within itself, all kinds of sexual immorality and things that are happening within it. It's just a bad city. And God's like, you know what? I'm done with this one. We're going to cut it out. And he plans to destroy it. And what he does is he sends a couple of angels in there to see if there's anybody righteous, anybody good people, and you meet this guy named Lot. Now, I would not necessarily say that Lot was a good dude, but I would say he's slightly better than all the other guys that are in there. And the two angels come, he takes him to this house, and by the time he gets to this house, there's a whole entire crowd, a big old mob that's coming outside, and they're like, hey, give us those two guys that you have in there. They're two angels. Give us those two guys in there so we can rape them. Legitimately what it says in the Bible. They want to gang rape these two angels. And Lot is starting to freak out. And he's like, I don't know what to do about the situation. And he kind of starts going through his head about how it is that he can appease this crowd that's outside screaming at him at the door. So this is his response. This is in Genesis, by the way. It's very early in the Bible. It says, so Lot went out to them, to the crowd, threw the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have two daughters who have not known a man, virgins. Please, let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason why they have come under the shadow of my roof. Oh, God. Guy says, what am I going to do? They're trying to rape these two dudes here. How about I chuck my two daughters that are virgins? That was his solution. Wow. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say that that Lot was a great dude. I'll kind of venture to say that decent intentions. He's just trying to protect these guys. Again, his brain's all over the place, and I know you can't justify what he did anyway, shape, or form. But I'm trying to tell you that we're in a place in which sex trafficking, selling somebody, giving women away, girls away, young women away, very common, very common. And even as old as sitting in Genesis. At this point, very close to the beginning of the world. We end up seeing the slave. Who's the slave? You see the girl. She's a slave, right? But when you think about that a little bit more, we ask that question, who's the slave? When I look at situations like this and I'm looking at that, I start thinking to myself a little bit more. Asking this question again. No, really, who is the slave, though? Is it really her? Is it really her that's the slave? The viewers. The fact of the matter is that if there's no demand, there's no supply. It's a business tactic. You understand that. Supply and demand, right? Well, if there's no demand, then there's no supply. What's the supply? Is sex trafficking or selling women? People are addicted to sex, if you would, right? Selling women, that's a supply. Well, what's the demand? The demand is that I want to have sex. That's the demand. Well, if that demand is really high, guess what? Your supply is going to go really high too. So if there's no demand, if nobody wants to have sex with people who don't have any consent whatsoever, what do you think is going to happen to the supply? It's going to drop, right? So when we ask that question, who is the slave by that point? The demand is raising through the roof because these men and these women have not understood upon themselves that maybe I'm a slave to something like sex. Maybe I'm a slave and I need it so bad to the point to where I'm going to backtrack on my own morals and completely break the whole fabric of humanity itself just to be able to get what it is that I want. Sounds like these guys may be the slave, not necessarily her. There's no obsession, there's no problem. But you think about that for a second. Think about all the different things that it is you know that you're a slave to, the things that you're addicted to, the things that you think about all the time, the things that got your mind. If you think about these things a little too often, it gets to a point where it kind of becomes a problem, right? It comes to a point where it kind of starts controlling a lot of things that you do. But the fact of the matter is, if that wasn't there, I wouldn't have half the problems that it is that I have right now. Most of my problems come from my obsessions. Most of my problems come from my own personal slaveries. So when we think about this word slavery, we can think about a couple things, at least I do. I mean, you can be a slave to the way that you dress. You can be a slave to the car that you drive, transportation, or bike. You can be a slave to money. You can be a slave to your work. You can be a slave to entertainment. You can be a slave to shopping. You can be a slave to status. You can be a slave to gossip, drama. You can be a slave to pornography. You can be a slave to any kind of technology. And it can also be a slave to relationships. all these different things here are tapping in on some things that are, there's a few things in here I can see myself and be like, I'm pretty much a slave to that one.
Forgot one.
What was that?
Forgot one.
I forgot one? I forgot a lot. There's a lot of slaveries that go in here.
I would say
This
so,
right
yeah.
here, all of these right here, are things that are relatively common for people in general. In fact, most people would deem these to be not so bad if taking a certain type of, a certain amount of. But the fact of the matter is that even the Bible understands these things as slavery. It says in 2 Peter 2:19, it says, they promise, being them, false prophets promising us, they promise them freedom, but they themselves are slaves of corruption. For whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. Is the Bible speaking to us about saying that the things that overcome us, that we think about all the time, we are slaves to that. We are enslaved to those things. That's an important thing for Peter to understand, for Peter to be able to say to us. When we think about slavery, slavery always causes pain. Always causes pain. Because when I look at these, there's nothing inherently bad about any of these things on this board right here.
They didn't say drugs.
Nothing inherently bad on this board right here, right?
Which makes it vulnerable.
When I look at this list right here, of these things at least, I think to myself, I think we can have all these things. I don't think there's a problem with all these things. But when we become obsessed with any of these things is when it starts to destroy us, right? Any of these things. Drama? Drama kind of happens. I hear things all the time. It's not going to destroy me unless I'm like dying for the drama. Hey, spill the tea. If I'm sitting there like that all the time, then maybe I am attracted to the drama a little too much. Status, I need to be seen like this, and if I'm not, then I'm going to have this internal battle with myself about who it is that I am. Work. People go to work all day long, make no time for anybody else, including their family. It happens all the time. It's to break them to pieces. Money, easy. Easy. Fight for money and how much money you need. Because you bank on it being able to take care of you. The way that you dress, what you drive, relationships. You become a slave to your relationship, you are codependent. That's a fact. When it becomes slavery in your relationship and you must and you have to, well, then it becomes codependency. All of a sudden, these ideas of putting these things on the top of the list of what it is that you need, these things start to cause pain because at those moments when the healthy relationship becomes codependency, you start feeling the pain. If anybody in here is codependent, been in a toxic relationship, that's a painful thing to have to go through. It didn't have to be painful, but we made it painful because we became obsessed over the relationship. It's usually what happens. Same thing again happens with everything else on this list. It's fine for now until it becomes an obsession, until it overtakes the mind, and then all of a sudden we become slaves to that. Well, if we're trying to work our way out of that one way or another, we go to Romans 6:17. It says, but thanks be to God, that you were once slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. Slaves of righteousness. So far we've been talking about slavery in a very negative light. But all of a sudden, there's this phrase here, slave of righteousness, that comes in. We were once slaves of sin, but now we're working towards the slaves of righteousness. Well, what's the difference between the two? Well, slaves of sin has a very specific kind of, we'll say, a route that we go down when it comes to slaves of sin. The first thing that happens is that we're insecure, right? Insecurity pops in. I'm insecure, something's wrong, I need something, whatever that is, right? Insecurity comes in. Next thing after that is the attraction to something that's going to fill in that space. Ooh, I like that. I think it's going to be able to take care of my insecurity if I'm right. Once you're attracted to it, you begin to try to copy it. It's the first steps of becoming it, if you would. You start copying it. I want to be a part of that, whatever that looks like. I'm going to try to look like it as best I can. But then you want to go deeper into it, obviously, because it's going to have to fill in that insecurity. So what you do is you start to study it. Everything you do is about it itself. Learn everything you possibly can about that thing. Start to get to a place where you start to become it. And all of a sudden you become what that is that you were obsessed with. Slavery starts taking over of who it is that you are. And when that happens often enough, what's inevitable is that you will share it with others. Others will see your insecurities and the solution that it is that you found, and they will look at that and they say, oh, that seems like a pretty good solution for me. Nobody gets to just make up things on their own. Most people see it happening with somebody else, and they say to themselves, it sounds like a pretty good idea for me. They begin to share it. Slaves of sin, this is the step-by-step process for us when it comes down to it. But when it comes down to the slaves of righteousness, these are the steps of how slaves of righteousness would go when it comes to us leaning towards God. One, we recognize that we're insecure. Right? I'm insecure, I got some problems, there's some holes in my life, and I know that I need God. But the only reason why I know that is because I was attracted to God. I see me seeing somebody else showing love, showing some sort of connection. Maybe somebody said something that was really wise, and I was like, that's actually pretty smart. Where'd you get that from? Well, my Bible. Well, it didn't come from me, it came from my Bible. Oh, wow, being attracted to that, right? I like that. I'm really insecure. You seem to have some sort of solution for me. You end up finding God. So what ends up happening after that is we copy it, right? We start coming to church, start trying to read our Bibles, we start trying to pray. You're holding hands next to the guy next to you, like, oh my God, Chief, please just close this already. This is so awkward for me. At least that's my life. To be able to be in that place, you're like trying to copy it. I'm trying to copy it. What the people have here is really great. I like this. I'm just trying to copy it right now. But eventually it gets to a point where you stop copying it because after that, you start studying it. Right? I want to come more. I want to come to more studies. I want to start seeing what's going on here. I'm trying to watch these people deeper. What is that thing that they're doing? I just want what they have. I begin to study what's happening here. I begin to study what it is that God is doing in other people's lives. After that, when we study long enough, we become it. Right? We start to become what it is that we were attracted to. All of a sudden, that peace starts coming into your life, and you start to realize to yourself, oh, I'm actually starting to get it now. Like, it's starting to just kind of become who it is that I am. I show up enough, I start studying enough, I start doing all these things enough, and I start becoming. And then you know what's inevitable that happens after that when you become it?
Share it.
Share it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's inevitable. You will share it. People will see you and they say, I like that, what is that? And they get to start their own cycle. Because the reason why they're attracted to it is because they're insecure to begin with. Anybody notice the differences between the list? Nothing. Our pursuit of slavery is the same when it comes to sin and when it comes to going towards God. It's the same. It's the exact same. When it comes down to the processes, we do the exact same thing. What that means to me is that we choose our slavery. That's the fact. We are powerful enough to be able to choose what we're slaves to. Because the processes are exactly the same. You can't tell me that. I just don't know how. Nope. You know how. You know how to be a slave to something 100%. In fact, we've been doing our whole entire lives. Which means that we have the power to be able to choose what it is that we want. When we think about that word slave of righteousness, what is that? It kind of hurts my ears a little bit. I still don't like that word slave, Anthony. You're not really selling me on this idea that I should be called a slave. Well, if I'm going to change it around a little bit, I'd say that slave of righteousness is more like godly conviction. Godly conviction. I don't know if you've ever felt this before, but the conviction of doing something. I have to do it, right? That feeling of like, I don't feel like it, but I have to. I'm convicted. I'm convicted to do the right thing. I'm convicted to do the thing I know that I have to do. It's the good thing to do. I don't want to do it, but I have to. That's a conviction that lands inside of us. For us to be able to feel that, truth be told, if you feel that conviction, I have to do the right thing, that's that slavery mentality, but you're slave to righteousness by that point. And we call that something a little different. We call that conviction. That has now become a conviction of mine. I now am swayed. And a great example of what this looks like is right here from Jesus Christ himself. He's about to be crucified. He's really close to this. In Matthew 26:38-39, it says, Then he said to them, to his disciples, My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. How's Jesus feeling right now?
Not good.
Not good. He's sad. Sorrow to the point of death. You ever felt that way before? Sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My master, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. He sits down and he prays to God. Prays, and he says, If it is possible, may this cup, this situation be taken from me. I don't want to go through this, but not as I will, not what I want, but as you will, what you want. That's conviction. The ability to say, I understand what it is that needs to be done, and I have the choice to not do it, but I have to get it done because it's the right thing to do. This right here is a slave to righteousness. Slave to righteousness. This is a wonderful example of what that looks like. Because it is this feeling. I do because I must. I do because I must. I have to do it. Nothing, I can't not do it. If you think about this and the idea of righteousness, I have to step in and stop this fight. I have to go in there and try to help this person. I have to do this, and that. What do you mean you have to? What does that have to? I have to do the right thing. I can't do something in the opposite direction. It just doesn't feel right. If you flip that phrasing to something else, man, I can't believe I did that last night. Why'd you do that? Because I felt like I had to. You got us being slaves to sin, it's the same thing. When we're slaves to sin, we do it because we must. You end up finding out that we must the day after or after whatever sin is committed, and we think to ourselves, man, I tried to control that and I couldn't stop myself from doing that. Why is that? Because I do it because I must. I'm a slave to sin. I'm a slave to whatever that thing looks like. You flip that in the opposite direction, and looking at how Jesus handled it as well, he does it because he must. He does the right things because he must do the right thing. That's what it means to be a slave of righteousness. Which means that we're all sellouts.
Oh.
We're all sellouts. But to what? But to what? We're all sellouts. To be able to figure out what it is you're sold out to has a lot to do with where your mind's at. What it is you think about, the things that you're thinking about all the time. Because again, we're all sellouts. Again, there's not one independent person on this earth. You're all sold out to something. Everybody is sold out. So, questions are coming, but what am I sold out to? I think of this scripture very quickly. Here in Matthew 6:24, it says, this is Jesus talking, he says, no one can serve two masters. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You can replace money with whatever addiction you'd like. But he says you cannot serve two masters. It's not like we can divvy it up and say, how about a little bit of slavery over here and a little bit of slavery to God? There's no version of that. He says you can't do that. Because by that point, you'll love one, hate the other, be devoted to one, and despise the other. See, to him, it is very easy to understand. Let's just use money as an example. If you're completely locked into how much money you make and that being your security and that's going to be your God in any way, shape, or form, you think about that all the time. You may not admit it that way, but that's what it is that gives you any kind of substance. When God gives you a challenge to be able to do something with your money that is righteous, it's kind of irritating. It's irritating. I don't want to do that. This is my money. I've earned it. How am I supposed to buy A, B, and C? How am I supposed to make rent? Blah, blah, blah. All these different things that come along with that, right? When God challenges us to do that, we begin to despise the other master. We begin to love one and hate the other. We cannot serve two masters. We can't do both at the same time. So, what ends up happening? When we meet Jesus and we start thinking to ourselves, you know what? I want to kind of lean into the God thing. I want to start leaning more into God. I want to stop being a slave to whatever this is. John 8:36 says, so if the Son, God, sets you free, you will be free indeed. Actually free.
Amen.
Actually free. How many of you guys know that you got the world and all of its addictions, and then you got God? A lot of us like to think that it's this addiction versus this slavery and that slavery. And all of them are in the same kind of pool with God. That's actually not true. The way that it is that it's all of the addictions versus God. All of the slaveries. Because if anybody's ever been through this before, you get rid of one addiction, you can just get another. You don't replace it with God. You just find some other addiction to be able to replace it with, and you end up feeling what? Same. Nothing changes. It's because nothing is comparable to God. Nothing. So when we lean into this idea, it's like, it's just this one that's bad. I'll just take this one over here. No, that one's bad too. What about this one? No, that one's bad too. All of them are bad. They're all terrible. If it isn't God, it's going to be bad. And if it isn't bad now, it's going to be bad later. It's like snoozing destruction. Just snooze it out a little bit longer. See, if substance abuse was the first addiction that destroyed your life in a day or two, you get into a codependent relationship, that'll destroy your life in 10 years, 15 years. Just snooze your next addiction. This is what we do for ourselves. I'm just going to replace it with another thing. It's like, no. When you do that, you're still slaves. You're still slaves. You're still slaves. That's why, if the Son, if God sets you free, then you will be actually free indeed. Now I'm actually free. This is real freedom now. I've never felt this before. Why is that the case? I've tried all these other things. How come they didn't work? It's because you weren't free. You were never free in any of these things. That's why it feels different now. That's why it feels a little bit different, because I actually was set free by the Son. Now I'm actually free. Free indeed. And when you start thinking that way and start understanding that a little different, then you begin to start sounding like some of our forefathers in the Christianity, like Paul, where he opens up his letters like this. Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated from the gospel. Bondservant. Now, a bondservant at that time was somebody who understood they were going into slavery. Said, I'm putting myself into it. Putting myself into slavery. It was my choice to come into this. I know that. A lot of people, they would do that a lot of times because they didn't have enough money to do something. So they'd sell themselves for a couple of years to be able to pay off a debt or something of the sort. But they were full-blown slaves by that point. Once that time was up, you cut it out and you go back to your thing. No more debt. Paul sees himself when he understands the differences where he stands and who he's with. So on this side, he sees himself, you know what? I'm a bondservant of God. He sees himself, I'm a bondservant to Jesus Christ. So many different ways what he says is, I'm not ashamed of being a bondservant for Christ. Right? If we can get to that place, man, I'm not ashamed of that. Being a bondservant, being a slave to Christ. I'm not ashamed of that. Well, why aren't you ashamed of that? Why aren't you ashamed of this idea of you being a slave to God? Because again, it still sounds wrong. Why doesn't it feel that wrong when you're in it? Well, it's because I don't have a master, I have a father. I don't have a master, I have a father. And there's a difference between the two. I don't have a master who whips me and tells me what it is that I have to do, and if I don't, then. I have a father who loves me, who says, I want you to be able to do these things because, not you better do it or else. It's you're doing this because. That's how a father speaks to his children. I don't have a master. I'm A-okay saying I'm bondservant of Christ because I don't have a master. He doesn't act like a master. He acts like a father. Go back to the scripture where Jesus is praying because he's all out of it. This word actually wasn't master. He prayed and he says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not my will but yours. He said, my Father. See, Jesus himself even speaks to God like that. My Father. See, Jesus doesn't have a master. He understands his relationship with God by that point, and we should as well. When it first comes down to it, to be honest, we finally choose, I want to be with God. And a lot of times that transitional period feels a little awkward. In fact, it ends up feeling like, I obey my master. Just do whatever it is that he says. He says I can't do this, I can't do that, right? It starts off like that for a lot of people. It's like this big old list of rules. It's just like, it's God, what am I going to do? Not do it? That's what it feels like a lot of the times when people start leaning into that. Well, after a while, if you're studying and you're becoming and you're actually leaning into this place, you get to a point where you say, you know what? I actually trust my master. I trust my master. I trust that he's not just doing this and I have to do it, I guess I have to. I believe you get to that point where you start saying, I trust him actually. I trust my master. I think he's got good intentions, or I'm not going to be messed up by the end of it. I think he's cool with that. Well, when you start digging even more and more and being able to understand this relationship between you and God, you get to a point where that changes. No longer I trust my master, it turns into I trust my Father. You begin to understand the relationship between you and God. It actually has nothing to do with master to slave. It's very much to do with father to child. You begin to understand that relationship based off of how it is that you work, how it is that you walk. Because if you were to do something that God didn't want you to do, he would punish you if he was your master. Read your Bible, he doesn't really punish us. He allows us to do whatever it is that we want, and we end up bumping our heads. Then we look to God and say, how come you're doing this to me? It's like, I didn't do anything to you. You did your own thing. I let you go. Like, I'm not a master. I'm not going to force anything on you. God doesn't force himself to be anything. He's a father. You can understand, I trust my Father now. I trust that my Father, he has something good for me. I start to believe that he actually has good intentions for where it is that I go. I get to trust him. But then after a while, you begin to lean into a little bit more. The more and more that you start trusting the Father, the more and more you're paying attention to things and how he does things. And you're noticing how he treats everybody else. And not just yourself in the time frame where it is that you're at, but you're noticing how he treats everybody else. And how most of the things are the same, or some things are a little bit different. But they're all in the same category of love. He's still the Father. By that point, where it turns into is instead of I just trust my Father, it turns into I understand my Father.
Yes.
I actually understand why he does what he does. I understand why he said to me, hey, don't do that. I understand it now. Oh yeah, I get it, yeah, oh for sure. I can see it now. Thank you. I wasn't even paying attention to that. I wasn't even looking at that. You got my back, thank you, I appreciate that. No longer is it I trust you, Dad, like everything's gonna be fine. It turns into, no, I get it. I understand exactly why you said that. I understand exactly why you said that. I understand exactly why I went through that. But it doesn't even stop there. Because when you get farther and farther into your relationship with God, and farther with your relationship with the Father, eventually what this turns into is not just I understand my Father, it turns into I care like my Father. I care like my Father. All of a sudden you become it. You don't have to wait for God to do it for you. You're going to do it. It's because now you see things before, it feels like, before he sees it. You're in there in the situation and you're like, no, I got this. And you go and you take care of the person. And you talk to the person. And you show love to that person. No longer is it, well, I understand why you're doing that, God. No, you actually begin to care just like the Father. You begin to love just like God does. You walk around, you get to it before anybody has to ask you anything. It becomes a second nature. And all of a sudden, you're doing things the way that God does that because you start caring like your Father cares. This process takes some time. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it happens very quickly. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the times, it starts with, I obey my master. I obey my master. Have to. I have to do it. Eventually, it turns into, I care. It's not that I have to. I want to do this. I want to care the way my Father cares. Because now I understand him. So no longer is this character in the sky that's shooting lightning bolts and smiting people. It actually turns into no, I actually understand what's going on here now. He didn't force anything upon me. He waited for me to make decisions, and he still does. Trust me, God doesn't have you by the hand that says you can't go nowhere without me. He doesn't do that. He lets you go. Oh, go ahead. It's fine. This is because, again, he's not trying to be a master. He's trying to get us to understand that he's our Father. So then we land in a certain place and we start talking about this whole thing. You can either be in that place where you're seeing him as the master, or you can land in this place where you start seeing him like a father. Instead of being able to be seen as a slave, you look at yourself and say, well, maybe you're a child. You can change the way it is that you see God and what it is that you've chosen to put yourself into. You can choose to put yourself in this, or you choose to put yourself into a family. You choose to put yourself in the hand of God because you understood that this was better than everything it is that I had before. Wow, I just feel at peace. I feel like something's growing. I feel like I'm going somewhere. I feel like something's happening in my life. I feel like a child of God. When you have child of God mentality, there's not fears that come in. Fear does not come from God. We start walking around a little straighter. We start thinking about love a little deeper. We start understanding and seeing people a little different. That's not my mind that thinks like that. That's God's mind that thinks like that. That's a God in me that thinks like that. All of a sudden, I'm becoming one with God. I begin to understand that Christ living in me is this idea of the things that I do is not because I'm doing it. It's because God's doing it inside of me. That is a full-blown movement. That's a full-blown movement within yourself and a big understanding of who it is that you are and where it is that you land. So you can be in this place where you understand I'm choosing what it is my slavery is. I'm not going to be living this anymore. I'm going to be a child of God. I want to be this. I'm sick of trying to figure out all the other things. I want to be this. Okay, well then claim it. Claim it. What does it mean to be a child of God? I'm a child of God. All right, good. What does that look like for you? Does that mean you keep on going back to over here? No. Is this going to happen? Absolutely. But to be able to lean in this direction and say, I want to be a slave to God, is a big move. Because if you don't, well then you're just a slave. You can end up being a child of God as much as you like, but if you end up giving up on it, you say like, hey, maybe that looks like way more fun. That looks way more liberating. I can find more freedom over there. Then you're more than welcome to be a slave. But those are the two directions it is that we have in our lives. It's either you're a slave to this world, or you're a slave of righteousness. You're a child of God. Every single time that I think about a subject like this, it usually is connected and directly connected to so many different things. In fact, it's popped off when I asked Jackson, I said, hey, what do you think I should talk about on Friday? And he said, let's talk about independence. I started thinking about independence. All right, independence. I started thinking about it. So, okay, what's the opposite of independence? Independence, opposite of independence is codependence. So what's codependence? Codependence is slavery. And I started going, it's like, wow, I think that we have a pretty big problem when it comes to slavery. But then when the Bible starts talking about slavery, it starts talking about like, oh yeah, sure, slavery, I get it. How about you try a different type of slavery, where you connect to God, turns into a conviction. And all of a sudden you begin to understand your relationship with God by that point. That you are a child of God. That He is our Father. The choice is very much ours. We have a choice to be able to land on one side or another. It's entirely up to us. Most of the time, we need some help. We need the attraction to what it looks like to love, what it looks like to be able to connect. That's why we need each other. To be able to say, when I see somebody else, when I come here, what I am a slave to is God, because I see the God in every single one of you guys. I see Jesus Christ. If we are the temple and Jesus resides in you, when I'm close to you, I'm close to God. I'm going to church when I go to you. I understand that when I come here. When I connect with my brothers and sisters in Christ and the people that believe the same thing that I believe, I know that what I'm doing is I'm coming to people who are going to take me to God, remind me that I'm a child of God. When I go to anybody else, they always point me back to slavery. Always. And the reason why is because they can't point back to something else. They don't know how to say, why don't you be a child of God? They're usually like, how about you try a little bit of this and a little bit of that? And all of a sudden I'm stuck back in slavery all over again. Understand who you are. Understand what you've chosen. Understand what it is that you're going to do with yourself and where you're going. And understand that making a choice is very much in your hands. Slave, child of God. That's all I have for you guys today. If you guys can stand up with me so we can pray out.
Woo! That was very good. Thank you guys
Just a reminder to everybody, we have all kinds of meetings that happen during the week. Friday night is one of them. We get together on Sunday night for the big party, per usual. We get together on Monday night for a Bible study. Tuesday night for a Bible study with Chief. We get together on Wednesday for any ladies. Do St. Sandra's Women's Study, which I hear is great. And outside of that, we have random things that kind of come up. For example, on tomorrow, if you'd like to go over to Godwave, which we get to hang out with Chill, and he basically does his version of Magic House, but over there in Burbank. We get to go over there and kind of hang out and play some music, and a lot of cool things happen there as well. But if you'd like a ride, because we know Burbank is kind of far, show up here, 5 o'clock, and the bus will be taken off around about that time. So if you'd like to show up and hang out with us, and it's always a fun car ride up. You get to know somebody who's sitting next to you. Chief is pretty strategic about putting you next to a person that you don't know. That's on Saturday. So you're forced to get to know people. And yeah, if you'd like to do something tomorrow, show up at 4, and you'll be busy for the rest of the night for the most part. And if anybody's interested in being baptized, which I highly recommend for anybody who's trying to make that step forward and trying to really commit, and baptism is just the commitment out loud, is being able to tell everybody on the outside, this is what it is that I'm choosing. I'm choosing a child of God. Good. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to be baptized, we'd love to celebrate that with you. And where we'd like to celebrate with you is that Sunday morning over at New Song. So New Song's going to be hosting the baptism on Sunday morning. We do it at 11 o'clock. So if you guys are interested, think about it a little bit. Don't think about it too much. But like I said, lean to that direction and do that with us. We'll be there at 11 o'clock. But outside of that, stay connected, stay talking to people, and just, again, keep on making the choice. You have a choice every single day about what master you want to serve. So get to that point to where you actually choose the one that's going to be helping. Tran, can you close us out in prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you, Lord, just thanking you for giving us this time to be here together, to be able to hear your word, Lord, and to be able to have such a good community with people to be around to and be accountable and encourage each other. I just pray traveling mercies for everybody on the way home, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
Don't turn this off yet.